got about 2 or 3 minutes to wait for everybody to come. Is that right?
Yeah, that makes sense, Elizabeth.
Do we start now or we wait for more customers?
Oh, how many of us do we have? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I can't hear your sound now.
No, that's okay. I was talking to myself.
Oh.
It looks like we have 11 or so.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, quite all right. It looks like we have 11 or so committee members. So I think that we can definitely, I think we can go ahead and start.
Okay, very good. Welcome to everybody who's come to the meeting, the June Zoning and Development Committee meeting. The co-chairs are Anthony Cohn, who is here, and myself, Elizabeth Ashby. And I think Kevin Wu is going to tell us how to play the game and get it recognized and so on. So Kevin, if you'd like to tell us how to behave, that would be great.
Sure. Welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you're currently muted, and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except for the committee co-chairs, Anthony, Elizabeth, and Sharon, and any presenters as we move through the agenda. Following the presentations, the co-chairs will call on the members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chair is calling you. The chat is available for technical support only, to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. The first item is the presentation on 220 East 86th Street to amend the BSA variance. And I see that the presenter is here. Eric Vath will present the application.
Thank you, co-chair. Thank you, committee members. We appreciate taking the time to speak with us this evening. If I may, I'd like to share my screen. My name is Eric Vath. I'm partner at Goldman Harris. We're a land use and zoning firm. And I'm joined by Mike Rossani. He's an architect and principal of Michael Zenreich architects. Hopefully you're starting to see my presentation. Great. Before you tonight is an amendment to an existing BSA variance. It was actually 3 variances for 3 separate buildings granted in 1977, long time ago. But we're here before you. This application will be on BSA's SOC calendar. That's their, if you're not familiar, that's their faster approval calendar for smaller actions. It will go to a public hearing, of course, at BSA. That's already been scheduled for the end of July. But first, we would appreciate your feedback. So let me walk you through the background of the site, and I'll tell you a bit about the proposed action. What you're looking at is a partial zoning map. The variance site is indicated in a pinkish red outline. It's located between 3rd and 2nd Avenues and 86th Street to the north and 85th Street to the south. It actually extends from 86th to 85th Street. The receiving site, we'll talk about this. This will be the recipient of development rights if this action is approved, and that's located also on 86th Street at 222 East 86th. Quick note about the zoning. This is a split lot. That means that it's divided between 2 zoning districts, a C2-8A and an R8B. And because of that, the development rights that are available for transfer are limited. You can't transfer development rights across the district boundary line. So the subject development rights that we're talking about are only those that are available in the C2-8A. Quick note about the receiving site. The receiving site is owned by Postgraduate Center for Mental Health. You might be familiar with that building on 86th Street. Let me show you some photographs of both the variance site and the receiving site. The variance site is occupied by, you might be familiar with Modern Martial Arts. It's a martial arts gym. It's beloved in the neighborhood. I think it's existed for several decades now. Orange Theory is another gym in the facility. It's opened up recently in 2021. The 3rd and the 4th floor of the variance site building are currently vacant. The receiving site is next to it. That's located to the east of it. And that again is the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health. Let's talk about the history of the BSA approvals. These grants go back to 1977, and the reason there are 3 of them is because there were 3 buildings at that time. There were 2 of tenement buildings on 85th Street and the variance site building that I just showed you on 86th Street. The reason why it necessitated 3 separate actions at the time is because they were they were approved to extend the commercial use into the R8B district, that's the half on 85th Street, as you recall. They also got an approval for a commercial use on the 2nd floor, which when you have a mixed use building, it's not permitted in certain districts. It again was a small grant for extending existing commercial use. In 1992, it was amended to allow modifications for the floor plans. As you're aware, whenever you amend, if you have a BSA variance site, if you amend do tenant improvements, you have to go back to BSA for a variance. Now, at that time, they legalized a physical cultural establishment. You might be aware, this is PCEs, which no longer exist. They used to require special permits for, any kind of gym. In this case, it was a Taekwondo center, which preceded modern martial arts. So there was a PCE in 1994. It was amended and extended in 2004, and again in 2016. And then, as I'm sure your Community Board 8, I'm sure you voted on, PCEs were essentially made as of right in 2021. They're now called health and fitness establishments. And what does that mean? That means that you no longer need a special permit for a PCE. So again, all that's before you today is an amendment of the variance, not the special permits, which are no longer required. So here's a tax map. This is kind of an annotated tax map that would have been submitted with our BSA materials. You can see I've outlined here in blue the tenement buildings on 85th Street. They have ground floor commercial. And then this is the variance site building with the orange theory and the modern martial arts. The graduate health, the postgraduate health building is located on lot 37. That's the receiving site. Just another quick, this is a section. So this is, you're cutting through the building. I wanted to show you how the existing site operates between East 86 and East 85th. So what I've done is I've shown in the commercial spaces in the light green, and I've shown the residential spaces in yellow. The variance you can see here, which is that crosshatch in gray, you might see it on your screen. The variance is actually a small portion of these buildings. Again, the variance allowed the commercial to extend into the R8B district, and it allowed it on the second floor of on the East 86th Street side. There's a mezzanine in that space. That's why it might look like the third floor. It's actually a first floor, then a mezzanine, which doesn't count as a story, and then a second floor, just to give you your lay of the land. So why are we here? This is amendment of BSA variance. You might ask, well, aren't development rights typically a sale of development rights? Isn't that an as of right process? And you're right, it normally is. If I were a non-variance site and I wanted to sell development rights to my neighbor, I wouldn't be here at the community board. I would have an agreement with my neighbor. I'd sell them development rights, and I would record certain exhibits, and I would file some drawings at Department of Buildings, but it would be a completely as of right process. But because of a court case in 1997, it's called Bella Vista. So you might hear people refer to these applications as Bella Vista applications. The New York Court of Appeals held that BSA has jurisdiction to review these types of mergers, zoning law mergers, and transfer of development rights, because the site is subject to a previously granted variance. And BSA will look at certain findings. The first thing they want to do is make sure that it's consistent with this Bella Vista holding, which establishes a couple of points that I'll get to in the next slide. But the other point is to make sure that it doesn't conflict with the original findings of the BSA variance. And here we have an old variance, so we'll get into the original findings. You probably have heard from your other BSA applications that there are a list of findings that you have to make for a variance. Those are not being opened here, right? Those findings were made in 1977. But what do we have to show for this application to be approved? Basically, we have to show that the development rights were never considered as part of the original financial analysis, the hardship analysis in 1977. So usually with these applications, you get a financial analysis prepared by, in this case, Jack Freeman and Capolino. And what it does is it looks at the old history of the BSA case And it tries to see if at the time the board weighed if those development rights had any value or and if they were considered in the original approval. Now, according to Bella Vista, there are these this three-pronged test. And it talks about how, basically, how do you value those development rights, which now have value, and back then, maybe they didn't. What was the value back then? So the first thing they look at is the variance site, which is the subject to the variance, and this new receiving site, lot 37, owned by Postgraduate Center for Mental Health, were they ever under the same ownership? And why do they look at that? Because they want to make sure no one's gaming the system, right? If you receive a variance and then you sell off your development rights, you've already received essentially a benefit. So they want to make sure that you're not, double dipping in a way, right? So in this case, these two sites have been separately owned since 1977 and are still separately owned. So check. Second question, at the time of the original variance, was there a market value for these development rights? We all know the 70s were a pretty difficult time in the New York City. This specific area, along with a large part of Manhattan, was in a pretty depressed economic shape. So there wasn't a market for these development rights at that time. It probably took a decade before maybe there even was an opportunity to sell development rights. And so over the 45 years now, we're under the third prong. The development rights, the value has changed substantially. So whereas there weren't development rights that were valued at the time, now they do have value. So if BSA looks at all these prongs and they say, okay, and indeed there have been a bunch of cases from the 1970s around the same time, BSA has held that there was no marketable value of the development rights at the time, and therefore the transfer should be permitted today because they weren't the subject of the original variance. So, I realize we're getting into a pretty technical case, but remember, this is kind of a ministerial approval in any other setting. We just have to show that because it's the subject of a BSA case, that times have changed and that now it should be permitted, they should be permitted to sell these development rights to the neighbor. The neighbor, you've probably seen from our application, we don't know what their proposal is, but we do know this is again the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health. We do know it's going to be a mixed facility, commercial and residential. With that, I'd like to open up for questions. Again, I'm joined by Michael Rossani. He prepared the drawings that were filed with this application. He knows a lot about the existing variance site and the existing building. We don't know too much about the proposed as-of-right development, but we can try to answer your questions. So with that, I open up the floor.
We'll first go to the public and see what questions they have. And I hope they clarify. I believe the site has a height limit of 210 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a contextual district, C28A, which limits a maximum building height of 210 feet because it's located on a wide street.
So the new building has a height limit. And will the square footage permit a building that goes to that height? Is that
yes, I believe that's the intent. So yeah, they could.
Okay, so the potential building is, yes. Okie doke. First of all, we'll go to the members of the public, and I'll get the list up. The first member of the public is Elaine Walsh. Could you unmute Elaine Walsh?
Thank you. first, I want to say that I'm president of the East 86th Street Merchants and Residents Association. And we do have some questions. I think it's very hard to approve any change on an amendment to the variance without knowing what the developer will be doing with the site. Let me say that the mental health facility there is one of the worst on the block as far as a tenant or an owner of property. They have no respect. And the building next door is similar. And it is a blight. So I want to say that because I think that we cannot do anything until we have an understanding of what they plan. I have a concern that if they go up 210 on the psychotherapy building, that's the 220, I believe, that we have windows on the lot line there, and that will impact the people. I am surprised that you're going through a process here, having no idea what the use will be. And it's unclear, are you going through to 85th Street to make changes there also?
No, again, we're not making any changes. We're merely conveying development rights for an as-of-right development next door. So the variance site will not undergo any changes as part of this application.
Okay, and the transfer of air rights is only on the 86th Street buildings?
Correct, yeah. So we can't
Because
transfer
there's-
across the district boundary line.
Exactly, that's what well, I right now cannot support anything because I can't in a vacuum, nor as association, do anything with not understanding what the use will be. You know, historically, the mental health facility, the psychotherapy building, was a hotel. And while it may have had a range of different types of people living there, it was well respected. And there was caring to the community. Currently, the building is closed. And they have done nothing to try to upkeep the spot. The other thing I wanted to say about depressed and blighted community of 86th Street was that in 1987 or thereabouts, the Colorado did a transfer of air rights from 217 and 215 over to the Colorado that was building on 3rd Avenue. So back then, and that's what, 30, 40 years ago, there were transfers. So your position that it's only current that there's value, or maybe in the last 10 years, does not have a basis. We had a major change there with the transfer.
I appreciate the feedback. What I'd said in 77, there was no market, and that only 10 years later did the city really start to recover. So.
Oh, I thought you said only in the last 10 years. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But is there a way for you to find out from your client and who is the client? Is it the psychotherapy center, or is it?
No, so I
martial arts-
represent 220 East 86 LP, a limited partnership that owns that land. We don't have any control over the development site, other than to tell you that we know that they're planning on doing a mixed commercial residential. We can show, I think we do have an illustrative bulk of a building that we could show based on the maximum building height. But again, they're not subject to the variance, so they can build as of right, as if anyone who could build a new building on that street could.
Could you clarify that for me?
So their approval is, their building is not subject to BSA approval. Ours is. So when we transfer development rights, they just have to get permits from DOB. So they haven't, they haven't prepared they don't have any drawings that we're aware of, and they don't have any filings with DOB.
Right, I'm sorry. Which building are you representing?
The seller of the development rights. So that's 220 East 86th. That's the variant site. Yeah.
So that's the martial arts building.
Yep, correct. So that building's not going to change, but we're selling off the development rights is the proposal under this amendment.
And how many feet are you transferring or square footage?
Approximately 26,600 or so.
Which comes out to, I'm trying to think of stories. This building then could rise to the 210?
Yeah, that's their proposal, correct? They think they can
So then
utilize
they'll
them.
go up and block the windows on the lot line of the building to its east.
I have let's see. I don't see which building are
The
you
tall-
referring to?
Right? The one to the east of the psychotherapy center. That has windows on the side.
Yeah, unless those are protected by an easement or the building setback. Again, I don't have their proposal, so I can't speak to that.
Yeah, well, that means that those people will lose possibly even their C of O if those are bedroom windows. So, based on and your explanation of the variances, was very informative, and thank you. But based on the lack of knowledge as to what is going to go on there, I would recommend that the committee not approve this.
Thank you very
Thank-
much, Elaine. The next speaker will be Sherry Weiner.
I had a basic question. This original approval was granted about 50 years ago. What was the original reason for the variance, and why has it taken 50 years to do something with it?
It's a good question. It's been used for all 45 years or so, right? So I believe the original tenant was a restaurant and they wanted to expand into the rear yard. So maybe I go back to the section. So this allowed them, see this hatched area here? This allowed them to expand into the R8B district on both the ground floor and the cellar. So it allowed for a bigger retail space, bigger retail footprint back there. And then the variance also granted commercial use on the second story, which in a mixed use building, you're limited. You can't as of right do that. So by comparison, it was a minor grant. You probably see a lot of variances come through, which are a lot more significant.
So you're saying they took advantage of the variance when it was granted to do these small changes? And I know New York land use law is, I know, so archaic, but so now, even though that was 47 years ago, you can still say we have that variance and now we want an amendment to it?
Yeah, that's right. They continue in perpetuity unless there's a term in which you kind of have to renew it. But anytime you have to go back for an amendment if you touch the building. But a BSA variance is granted based on certain hardship findings about financial return. So they made those findings in 1977.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And the next speaker is Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Eric, thank you very much for the presentation. I have several questions for you. The board recently did see another example of a variance allowing commercial use on an upper floor. That variance had to be renewed every 10 years. Can you explain why this variance has not required renewal every 10 years for the same purpose of a second floor commercial in a mixed use area?
Yeah, this was not, there was no term limitation on this. So you're right, some variances have a term, special permits often have a term. There was no term on this variance. The PCEs, however, did have terms of 10 years, so those had to be renewed.
So, and is there any variance involved in the East 85th Street building's commercial use?
No, that's a grandfathered use. Those tenement buildings are from early 20th century. So
Okay.
that's a grandfather.
So then my final question, I mean, I have two more questions. One is pure curiosity. It doesn't bear on how I am thinking about this. How did these three buildings come to be a single tax lot?
I might have to refer to Mike if he has some background on that, but my understanding was they now have, I believe, a single C of O, and I believe there's egress provided from one of the, I think it's the Orange Theory space out to 85th Street. Is that correct, Mike? Is that what necessitated the combination?
That is correct. There is an easement in place that allows egress from the Orange Theory space on East 86th Street through the cellar that goes between then the two buildings on this diagram where it's hatched in the rear yard. And then you exit through the cellar of the 85th Street building and then out to the street. And that's how the buildings are combined. And they are, as of the DOB records, a single building under one C of O, all three properties.
Thank you. All right. So my final question, and I suppose this is the most important one, is since there is no longer a financial hardship, which is what originally led towards the variance, or at least one of the variances in this case, and since New York City is desperately in need of residential space rather than commercial space, as part of this application, is the owner willing to give up the variance for second-story commercial reuse and return that space to residential?
I can't speak to my client's willingness to do so, but that actually, to give that up, that would require us to include that in our BSA application. We could speak about it, but frankly, I don't think it's a realistic request here, because that tenant's been in place for some time and they do have a long-term lease.
When does that tenant's lease expire?
I'd have to find that out for you, but the martial arts studio recently renewed their PCE special permit. This was before, of course, PCEs were no longer required. It has a term that goes until, I believe, 2020 or 2030. Let's see. Their term goes until, January 2024. I know their lease, it runs through at least that amount.
That's not so far away.
That's not so far away. Yeah, I to be honest, I did not expect that question, but I'd have to speak with my client.
I think that would be an important consideration, at least for me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now Marco.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Let me start asking the question. Do you believe that this is a complete application? You don't think that offend us to put whatever is convenient just only for you and hide the rest? Because my fellow community member asked questions, the right questions, and she's unable to understand because there is no enough information. And that's what she's pushing in that direction. And since there is no information, your answer to her question was empty.
Sorry, to which point? Can you be more specific?
Oh, the point is, why don't you present all the application explaining why was granted and since the beginning? What is the meaning of the variance? In 2000, which one is the first one? I think it's,
97.
Nine-
Sorry, no,
70
77, yeah.
77. And then you have to provide the meaning of each application and the meaning how much you obtain or what is the relief that you receive. That is the point. Because the variance, let me clarify, the definition of the variance is not to make you whole. The definition of the variance is to help to provide some relief to your condition. That is the definition of a variance.
And did you review our complete application? Is there?
Well, I was expecting you tell me this application.
Yeah, we sent it to, we shared it with the entire community board.
So let's go move forward. Well, I just hear the answer that you said, because you need a means of egress. That has nothing to do with the means of egress when you combine a lot. What it is right here is one zoning lot. You can have several districts without no problem. And then obviously, whatever you put it, you have to be in compliance with the building code. That's means of egress. But that has nothing to do. You can, at any time, you can subdivide and probably maybe have 2 or 3 owners. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong. That is the definition of one zoning lot. Let me start saying this. I have these 2 questions or 3 questions. You start with a variance, then you ask an amendment of a variance, then you ask a special permit, and that we reach 1994. 1994, you knew the real estate was great in 86th Street and keep improving every time. So there is no anything to believe that time was exactly like 1977. That was in depression. That's fine. But now in 2000, let me see, and I have the CO, your CO behind me. I have the UC. In 1994, 95, you obtained the final CO where you describe all the uses. So that means at that time, you had an opportunity to present the real relief that you need in order to obtain the variance. And the variance was granted because you said, this is what I need. And that was the relief that was granted to you. But not only that, you have many other amendments or reliefs, and that's fine. Now you said, I need more relief because I have these air rights that I'm gonna sell it, which you said is 26,000 square feet. Put it in numbers at 300, just make the number what you're asking. So you keep asking to the lot that we don't know what will be the future over there. And we don't know what's gonna happen. We don't know exactly what is the situation. You want to have more relief. My question to you, what can the relief you provide to the existing affordable housing that facing 85th Street? Nothing. You're going to maintain as is? No, you need to provide something. You have to give something to the community. You cannot come to the community and keep, milking the variance. Because remember, this is a relief. This is not to make you whole. And that is the bottom line of everything. And we would like to see, yes, okay, you want something, give something to the community. Repair this affordable housing, make more sound, more secure, give something that allow us to make a decision. Yes, we can help you. But in this case, you just coming to ask a variance, like, I'm sorry to put it this way, like a welfare department in this community board. And I think that is wrong. It's time that the developers understand the community board is not the welfare department. The community board is we try to ameliorate the needs of the developer, the needs of the community, and be fair in both cases. But in this case, you just coming to us for more relief to make you whole. Thank you.
Thank you. for
Thank
the
you,
input.
Marco. Craig later.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Eric. A couple of questions, because I'm just getting a little confused as far as what was just being discussed. So I want to try to just bring us back to a broader perspective. So am I mistaken that if I heard correctly, this is an as of right development without even, if we were to take take out of the equation the TDR, the transfer of the air rights?
Yeah, correct. So the postgraduate Center for Mental Health can build an as of right 210-foot building without us.
So essentially this transfer of air rights would be to allow the cantilever portion, correct?
In part, but it also allows them to build more floor area residential for their mission, for their program. Yeah.
Okay, so if we were to vote against this, what would then be the current, what would be the scenario going forward? What would that result in?
I mean, I can't speak to what they would do if they would potentially buy off-site affordable housing certificates. They could probably equal a similar amount of floor area.
All right. Would we be able to develop housing in that situation, do you know, or?
Well, they are developing housing, but they can do whatever they want as of right, with or
Right.
without us.
But we'd be able to get more housing in theory with the transfer of development rights, with the air rights.
Well, correct. Yeah, they're gonna get, in theory, a larger building than they would just through offsite affordable housing certificates. We also don't know if they're going to try to generate on-site housing certificates. We don't really know much about their program.
No.
You can view their mission, which includes mental health and homeless support.
Okay, understood. And then I just want to go back to the variance for a second. So I know that we've been discussing whether it should be continued or renewed. I guess my question is from a functional standpoint. I don't even know if you could answer this, but if we were to deny the variance going forward, would that actually change anything in terms of how the buildings and the floors would actually be used aside from that sliver that is the variance itself?
Yeah, there's nothing before you with regards to the current variance. It's approved in perpetuity, so the uses are locked in. What's before you is the simple zoning lot enlargement and transfer of development rights. So.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, I know I probably don't align myself with some of the members here, but I think I'm generally okay with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And now Michelle Burnwell.
Thank you, Elizabeth. First question, do you plan to do, or do you know if does the developer of the receiving site plan to do anything with the 85th Street buildings, anything at all?
Those are my client's buildings. They're currently occupied. There's 42 dwelling units in there. Those aren't going to be touched. Again, the variance site is not going to be touched as part of this application. It's simply selling off development rights to allow the neighbor to.
Okay, so those buildings will not be touched as far as you know. Now, the site that is selling the air rights, after they sell what the amount that you stated to the receiving site, do they have any air rights left over?
No, but we're selling off everything in the C2.
You're selling everything to them.
Right. So they
But
would I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You finish your thought.
Yeah, and that's why, there's going to be a cantilevers, because effectively the building could never be enlarged. Right. So
the cantilevers being constructed as a part of the new 210 building. There will be
Correct.
cantilevers over the seller's existing site. That's where the
Correct.
cantilevers will be.
That's what we understand their proposal is, yeah.
So then you have seen some kind of an architectural rendering?
No, we only know what they've described. Again, they don't have any drawings prepared yet.
So that was just a verbal description that there will be cantilevering over the building?
Yeah, first, there's the process of going through BSA, so this, the DOB process won't happen until after BSA.
So the receiving site, as of right, can build to 210 anyway.
Correct.
Okay, so they only need the air rights in order to build the cantilever. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, I'm not here to, I don't know the specific floor plans, but I don't know what the developer's doing, but I assume that, yeah, most of those air rights would be apportioned into the cantilever.
Well, if they can build as of right to 210 without them, there has to be a reason that they would spend the money to buy them.
I think it technically depends on the floor plate, right? If you have a very small floor plate, you can build a lot higher. If you have a bigger floor plate, but yeah, your point is taken. I think it does allow them mostly to do
build the
bigger,
cantilever
yeah,
because
bigger
they can
floor
build
plate.
to 210
Yeah.
here anyway. Now, if the variance is granted, if we vote for it today, is that now in perpetuity?
No,
Or is
so,
there a limit on that?
no, so
time limit?
the variance is not before you. That was approved in 1977.
And that's
it-
in perpetuity.
That's right. Yeah. So
But what
that's
we vote on today, the transfer of the.
Michelle, it's not
Is that-
today. The public hearing is actually in July. So today's presentation is only informational. So the
Thank you, Will.
developer and everybody can come back to you guys with answers to your questions.
Yeah.
So nobody's voting on anything today. We'll have our public hearing for this project in July 12th at the
Oh,
land
so
use
there's no
meeting.
vote today.
No vote today. This is an informational presentation.
Okay, thank
And
you,
I thought that
Will.
was clear at the beginning, but if not, I heard several people talk about votes. So I just want to make sure everybody knows.
Okay,
Michelle, if I could
thank you.
interrupt for 1 second.
Who is that?
Mike Rosani, the architect, working with
okay.
Eric. We are retaining 300 square feet for the variance site.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's a good clarification. So there's a small amount of floor area that would allow us to do some internal enlargement of the mezzanine, for example.
But
Thank you,
that's
Mike.
that's within the footprint of the building.
Yeah, I think we'll be restricted from light and air easements and the cantilever above. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, but all right, so anything that would be approved at the land use meeting or wherever the vote will be taken on this will be in perpetuity because the transfer of the air rights, that you can't take them back. And because when you transfer them, that will give them the right to build the cantilever. So once the cantilever is in place, that's a forever thing. I mean, is that basically correct?
Yeah, and they could technically rebuild too using the development rights. Yeah.
Sorry, repeat that?
They could also rebuild in the future using the development rights. They would always have the development rights.
They can rebuild the receiving site, you mean?
Yeah, so they would, to your point, they would have these development rights in perpetuity.
And they can rebuild the receiving rights, but only within the footprint.
Yeah, so they could redevelop the site they would forever own the development rights. It's as if they own them, as if they're a pertinent.
They would own them.
Yeah.
And the donor building will remain as it is. The footprint remains that in perpetuity.
Yeah, it's under the jurisdiction of BSA. So any modifications to that building, we're coming back to you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And now Rita Popper.
I'm just a doubting Thomas. I have a question. Thank you for your presentation. We talk about building chits, that if the owner of the property that's going to build 210 stories, can they possibly ever go higher if they do something that increases their square footage by doing something in the building that makes it more desirable or more affordable, or adding by more affordable housing? Can it ever go above 210, or can it just stay there? No matter what chits are out there, whatever housing chits are out there.
Yeah, I haven't done an analysis of that site, but I assume there might be some bonuses available. We can get back to you at the next meeting, but again, that we're speculating. I don't know if they intend to seek any bonuses.
Thank you.
Oh, with another, thank you very much, Rita. And now Juno is a member of the community board.
Mm-hmm. Sorry if you mentioned this before. It wasn't clear to me. Was it possible to build more on the original site without demolishing the whole thing?
On which site? On the variance site or the receiving site?
The variant site.
Yeah, in theory, the variance site could be enlarged vertically on the C28A side. That would be a major we'd have to go back to BSA, and BSA would have to improve that enlargement.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to recognize my co-chair.
Oh, great. That would be me. I think
Longer than expected.
I think my problem here was actually articulated very well by Elaine Walsh a little while ago. I understand the sort of procedural idea of sort of doing A and then you do B. The problem is that we have no idea what B is expected to look like, how big it is the new project that the Postgraduate Center is proposing. Does it consist literally of just lot 37? Have they somehow acquired a lot nearby it and are going to build a much bulkier building, or is this going to be some little skinny thing 210 feet tall? We don't know, and I understand that you may not know either, but it is very hard for us to say, oh, okay, what a great idea, 26,000 square feet. That's a lot imposed on a building lot the size of lot 37, which is, so I think it would be very hard for me to support this when it comes before us at the next month. Okay, that was all.
I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Anthony. And I have a question. How wide is the receiving site?
Let me go up to I believe that's on the tax map, 34 feet.
How wide?
34 feet.
34 feet. Okay. And how tall is the taller, fully abutting building?
I'd have to research that. I don't know if Mike knows offhand. It's maybe in the range of
I
10,
do not
10 to
know.
11. We can get you that information, maybe in the range of 10 to 11 stories.
We can search the CFO for that property.
Okay. I bring that up because if you're less than 45 feet wide, you are limited in height to the taller, what you, on a wide street like this, the taller of the fully abutting buildings. And so I think that we have, as everybody pointed out, and I think that's why we're all shivering in our shoes, is we don't know what you will build. We know that you can't build beyond 210, but that's it. And we're not here to pass a resolution, but I think I don't know how we can develop a sort of sentiment that we can bring forward. But I think that we could hope that our fellows on the full board would support the idea that we will deny supporting this without the ability to approve what is built as a result of this transfer. I mean, you can do terrible things. So I don't think we want to give up that right and write a blank check here. Marco, is anyone else?
May I respond to that?
Yeah.
We appreciate all the input today, and we're gonna try to get you all the information we can. We understand the meeting's on July 12th. I was under the impression that that's still the committee meeting. That'll be the vote, and then the full board would be at the end of July or approximately 19th or so.
No, Eric, our land use committee is made up of the full board, so all actions taken by our land use committee, which it meets on July 12th, will be final. So if they vote at that meeting, it would have a 50 board member vote, and it would be a final vote, unless there's a reason to come back, at a later date.
Thank you for the clarification. So we're going to try to get you, we'll reach out to the developers, see what kind of information we can get you in the meantime. So I'm glad we were able to have this informational discussion.
I was just going to say that I think in response to Elizabeth's question, I think the point of acquiring the cantilever easement is to establish a contiguous street wall greater than 45 feet so that the developer can build above that building, above the granting site. My question is, can you share with us what the total acquisition price for the air rights and the cantilever is, knowing that it's going to be public soon enough?
I don't have that information. I don't even know if there are terms yet. Again, this is subject to BSA approval, so I can see if I can find that information out for you.
Thank you. Now, Adam Wald has not had a chance to speak on this, so can we please
Elizabeth,
unmute it?
Adam just spoke. Marco and Elaine are left.
Adam had not had spoken, so please unmute Adam.
Adam just spoke. He was the last person who spoke.
Well, Elizabeth, I just spoke. I spoke about the need for the cantilever in order to create a street wall of greater than 45 feet. And I also I asked a question about the total consideration for the air rights and the cantilever, to which I did not get an answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Marco.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Basically, my point is, I has been very harsh with the applicant, but at the same time, I'm gonna be fair. What he's doing is when they ask him to transfer the air rights, the only way, there is no other way, the only way to transfer the air right is to form a one zoning lot, meaning that the transfer lot, the transfer zone, the transfer of the air rights become part of the receiving lot. So the width of the lot now is wider than 45. So this sliver law, Elizabeth, I'm sorry to say, but it doesn't apply in this case. I have to be very fair with the applicant. What made me the second part is the receiving lot. The receiving lot. Let me finish before I go with the one zoning lot. So right now it is one zoning lot. The lot that is transferred the air rights, it has 3 lots, one facing 86 and 2 facing 85th Street, and that is considered one zoning lot. What they asking is they want to increase, they want to make a bigger one zoning lot. And one zoning lot, it can have different block and lot numbers without no problem, because they need to establish and pay taxes, pay the insurance, pay all this kind of stuff. But in the future, if one of this lot or one of these or the parcels are willing or looking for change, they has to address the completely zoning lot. So they are married forever now. They can cantilever, they can do whatever they want. Cantilever, I hate, by the way. So it's not going to look nice in the street, on the streetscape. But my point is, there are other the mystery is the receiving lot. The receiving lot of the air rights, it can be also put it an inclusionary housing. So make it taller and provide affordable housing, provide different kinds of housing, and provide probably some business too. But if we don't have a real knowledge what the owner of that property is going to do, so it is hard to make a decision. Probably they're gonna do something nice. Okay, we can support, but it's a mystery they put it to us. Maybe they're gonna sell it to a developer, and the developer, you know what are they doing now in the Upper East Side? I can prove it to you tomorrow. I can prove it. What they're doing is they make low density development. So that means they build just only low luxury housing with a very high tall floors. So probably the density will be 22%, like most of the developments in the Upper East Side. So we need to stop that part. In order to stop that part, we need to know what's going on in the other lot. What is the intention? And thank you so much. I don't want to take your time.
Thank you, Marco. Elaine Walsh?
Thank you. Some clarification. Does the postgraduate center still own that building?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Well, it's been closed for quite a long time. It's not operational. And whether it be the commercial on the street level or upstairs, it is totally closed. And the discussion in the neighborhood has been it was sold. But you then indicated maybe they would use it for their own programming. So are you saying that this may be an enlarged postgraduate center with residents for mentally ill and homeless, which would be very good? Or is something else going on?
I'm saying we don't know. My clients had the discussion with Postgraduate Health Center for Mental Health. We don't know what they're proposing to build. I'm going to try to find out and see if we can get you more information.
course, they do own other property in the, what's this, 86, about, could be 78, 77th Street. And that they've rented out a lot of that space to other entities. So, my real concern is, following up Marco, what is going on here? They've filed for nothing. It is a deplorable situation right there. They don't take care of the property. And we have, as you know, a tree pit filled with rats right there in front of their building, and they've done nothing. So the sense was it was sold. Because why has it closed for so long when they had the DHS contracts for so many years and had a 38 resident capacity there? So I would appreciate you finding out what is going on.
Okay, we'll do our best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. And back to Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you. This is a zoning question, and Adam Wald, I consider you one of the possible respondents here, in addition to the applicants tonight. This question of the width of the receiving building and the impact of street wall width on the permissible height of the new building. How does a cantilever, which will only occur above the height of 220 East 86th Street and would not touch 220 East 86th Street, how does the zoning regulation recognize that as 222 East 86th Street having greater width, greater street front width than its 34 feet? This is a lay person, I don't follow question.
Well, I'll let Elizabeth speak to that because she is the sliver law maven. Before I chime in. Or Anthony.
Yeah, carry on, Adam. I'm not sure on this. It's an interesting question. It's a good question.
So there are other properties in the Upper East Side that have done this same thing, where you essentially can lean over the building enough to create a street wall of 45 feet.
It's the width of the building. So that probably if they start cantilevering over, they'll get out of the sliver law. And I think that there's so much in this transfer of air rights that I don't think that they could squeeze it all in the receiving site without cantilevering. So that's one of the concerns.
So the width of the building is measured at its widest point, not at its base.
I don't know that we'll have to go back to that. And funnily enough, I was the one who proposed the sliver law. So that I think we just used the term the width of the building, and perhaps it wasn't the width of the building at any particular time, as I remember. But anyway, this was back in 40 years ago.
Okay, so this is probably something that would be helpful for all of us to better understand as conversations continue. Question then for Eric, what is the width of 220 East 86th Street?
Let me refresh my memory.
It's 41 feet.
41 feet.
So theoretically, there is 75 feet between two existing higher buildings that could potentially, and I don't know what width a
Mhm.
cantilever would support here, but there is potentially as much as 75 feet of width that could be utilized, subject to engineering constraints.
Oh, I don't think 75, 55 maybe.
But certainly,
yeah,
But
enough,
I think it will go beyond 45.
yeah,
And 45 is the amount where it's limited to the width of the street or the taller of the fully abutting building.
okay. Thank you very much. It's very helpful. I appreciate it.
Okey doke. Well,
and just one other, sorry, Elizabeth, just one other thing to answer, I think it was Elaine's question. Based on what I was able to find looking just now this second, the postgraduate center still owns the receiving building. It doesn't look like any sale or
that's for
activity.
Eric.
Yeah, for the last 19 years.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Okay, well, do any more committee members have a contribution to this, or should we, since we can't have a resolution, I guess we know where we stand and go on to the next item. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you for the excellent questions. We'll get back to you with feedback.
Wonderful, thank you. And
Thank you all.
so our second item today is a discussion of the 210 height limit. And this was a request from a committee member. And so I think who would like to speak first to this issue? It looks like Marco. Let's call on Marco. And by the way, Marco, just parenthetically, while you were allowed to speak, I think the certificate of occupancy as the background was especially telling and wonderful. So anyway, carry on.
Thank you so much. I think we had to have a meeting just only to explain what is one zoning lot, and that's the biggest confusion. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Being said that, I'm going to be out of my picture, and this is today. The last 2 days I have been receiving training in environmental, and if you see those pipes, actually there are drawings from the architects, and the smoke is the architects who create that as well as the engineers. That's basically is the beginning of my point of view. Yeah, I read all the paperwork that sent it to all of us, and I think the biggest problem is you cannot compromise everywhere with one paper. Impossible. Because one thing is Europe, another thing is America. Even in America, one thing is Los Angeles, and another thing is New York. Even in New York, you cannot compare Manhattan with Brooklyn, Queens, or any other borough. And even in Manhattan, you cannot compare the Upper East Side with the East Harlem. Everybody has different way to develop those developments. And that is the biggest point. And that is the biggest argument. In the Upper East Side, my finding is that I said already before, the taller the super tower is, the lowest the density. And the density I'm talking about in terms that of the number of dwelling units. I'm not talking about for the number of occupant per square feet that consume the energy. And this is the problem on the Upper East Side. The Upper East Side, they have huge apartments, maybe for one father, mother, and a child, or maybe two children, and that's it. If you divide that one per square feet, you know, the quantity of the energy is huge. So we have to limit the density. And the density is coming directly with the other possibility or the variety of the different choices of housing. And one of them being affordable housing. So this discussion, what I read, is basically too general to face any discussion or anything that help us. But as an education paper is very good. Even the paper recognize that they need more study. And the Upper East Side is completely far away from that. And so my point of view, I'm going to finish, is in our case is more related the super tall building relation with the density of people per apartment is extremely low and extremely expensive in carbon emissions. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Marco. We have Alida next.
Actually, Anthony, Boaz from the public raised his hand, so.
Okay. Thank you, Alida. All right, Boaz Galil first, then Alida.
1 second. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes and yes.
Perfect. So, me and my family live in one of the tall buildings that you guys really like. Now, I'm not rich. Our family is not rich. We are hardworking Americans, New Yorkers. We actually had a deal when we came here. It was during COVID. We are market rate. My wife works in the medical industry. I work in the high-tech industry. We live in apartment 38. My neighbors are not only they are not rich, they are rent control, meaning that this tall building is not a rich building. You know, rich people currently are not living here. Next coming year, rich people are coming because the rent is going up. But right now, the market rate, average people, you know, hardworking people like me, like my wife, are able to stay here. We have, again, the families next to us, our neighbors, are rent control, and we live in harmony. And I think this is the solution. This is not a problem. Tall buildings are the solution for the housing crisis. They are a solution for the pollution. It actually allows you to save the nature, right? You can build more dense. I understand the people in the board that most of you guys own apartments and you want to protect the value of your apartment, and some of you guys are rent control as well, and you guys want to keep your status, but please think about the people, think about the housing crisis that you have in New York. You know, the market rate, we don't see a lot of market rate here in the community board date, people are coming. I'm a market rate, but I don't see a lot of people, despite the fact, if you look at the statistics, please, Greg, you're good with statistics, pull the statistics and show them that in Upper East Side, you have a lot of market rate people, and we need the tall buildings because there is a housing crisis. So I'm against any addition zoning limitation of height. If you guys want to fight tall floors and what Marco was saying, So you can do it differently. You can say okay, we want tall buildings, but let's make sure that we have enough apartments in every floor. There are all kind of ways that you can make sure that you increase the housing units in Upper East Side and not decreasing it. But I think that the solution for all the problems is tall buildings, not smaller buildings. Thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time and hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you, Boaz. We have a bunch of committee members, but first I think we should hear from Andrew Ravishit.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak, and I really welcome everybody's feedback on the environmental sources that I shared regarding the necessity for 210-foot height cap. It's really interesting that when we talk about the 210-foot height cap in terms of the extra environmental pollution, we then immediately pivot to affordability and lack of affordable housing. And, you know, it's very easy to think that all of our tall buildings are going to solve the affordable housing crisis, because I thought that for a while too. But if we look at the raw data of our neighborhood, we have lost since 2007, over 14,000 rent stabilized units, as we've had massive amounts of construction and housing construction. I live on 81st and 1st. Within a block of me, both on 2nd Avenue and 81st, and 2nd Avenue and 80th, there are 2 huge new apartment towers. None of them are affordable housing. They're all luxury housing. In fact, affordable housing and the mom and pop shops and the restaurants such as Willie's were all knocked down. 2 other developments, the one on 77th and 2nd. In fact, I know I spoke with Craig about this when I saw him at the CB8 fair. All those affordable housing units were knocked down. A 500-foot tower is going up, and it's the same raw amount of units that those shorter buildings occupied. So we're not actually increasing the amount of apartments that we have. Nevertheless, affordable apartments, nevertheless, actually affordable apartments, because as we know, the affordable housing is not affordable. On 72nd and 2nd, there was a block across from the Q train of a bunch of rent stabilized units. And now they're building these taller apartment buildings. And on the surface of it, it looks like it's increasing the amount of units. Oh, yay. But what you learn is that most of them are going to be luxury units, and they're replacing any affordable housing with 1 4-story building. Each floor has 1 unit. So they're just putting in 4 affordable units on that lot, when previously the whole block was affordable. So we don't have to fight environmentalism and the affordable housing crisis. I think, for example, the mid-blocks, you know, in the papers that I provided, and there's a longer paper with more sources that I have if anyone's interested, there seems to be a jump of climate change pollution at 100 feet. That's around 10 floors, or 10 stories rather, and 210 feet, which is around 21 floors. I think that upzoning the mid-block to 100 feet and adding a bunch of floors of affordable housing in our mid-blocks could keep our building trades working forever, could have thousands of units of affordable apartments, whether it's they're taking down the building and adding new buildings in the mid-blocks, or rather really, if they're adding additional floors to the already existing structures. We do not have to fight displacement with development, but so often that's exactly what happens. I'll give one more lot example. On 80th and 1st, or it was a lot on 1st Avenue between 79th and 80th, there were a bunch of affordable housing units that's all been knocked down, and a huge medical tower is going up. So all of those units were lost. And in addition, the hospital that's going to be built there, the medical center, is very energy intensive. And you know what? I get it. I really want my hospital to focus on providing life-saving care. And I understand that they might not be considering the climate change implications, but all of those units were rent stabilized units. You could look, they didn't have air conditioners. These were working class people who cannot afford to run their air conditioners all the time. And I don't even think they had elevators. I think they were walk-up buildings. So that uses less energy too. Developers often put us in a trap of fighting between affordable housing and environmentalism. And that's exactly the fight that they want us to engage in. We don't have to have that fight. we can have a lot of affordable housing in the mid blocks under an 100-foot cap. And within 210 feet, there's a lot of room for affordable housing as well to contribute to the tapestry that is New York, where people of all income levels can live together in harmony. And so I'm hoping that we keep that in mind as we're discussing a height cap for environmental reasons, that it doesn't have to eliminate our drive to increase affordable housing. And in fact, the current system that we have now, this area, Community Board 8, from 2007 to 2019, lost over 14,000 units of rent stabilized housing. So we see the experiment occurring in natural circumstances. We don't have to hypothesize. We see what's actually happening. So that model doesn't work. I really welcome everyone's feedback. I know we can have a new model that contributes to increasing affordable housing and protecting our environment at the same time. And welcoming, our workforce that is left back into the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next we have Sasha Selim.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I just want to say I very much agree with what Andrew just said. I work in city government. I'm here as a private citizen, but I work in city government, in real estate development, in housing and affordable housing development, while also being a lifelong resident of Yorkville. Currently, I was not a casualty of the building of the Kent, but the Kent, in my opinion, decimated our block because we lost about 8 or 9 small businesses that we never got back. And there's a completely different feeling just from that. And I do agree that contextually, and my block isn't a contextual zoning block, it's just R8. I am behind the industrial site on 94th that's up for rezoning. There are ways that you can build more housing without always looking to demolish tenements, which is what developers tend to do in this area. One of the sites in the 94th Street rezoning, that was a rent stabilized building. There are 2 residential buildings next to the garage. One has been closed since 2015. It was, touted as, oh, there's a Con Ed problem. Con Ed's just going to check it out. Those are about 20 rent stabilized units that have gone offline for that entire time. And the proposed development would only add maybe 100 more affordable units, which again, with affordable, it's 30% of your income. Developers absolutely only go for 130% AMI because that's what makes the deal pencil. Any deal that's 40% AMI, 60% AMI, you do need that many more market rate units to offset it. The Upper East Side being a medical hub has also completely taken away housing. 79th Street on First Avenue, I went to middle school around there. That entire block, Extel bought it, then sold it again during the market crash, and then bought it back, and housing is going to be lost. 76 and 3rd Avenue, that was rent stabilized housing. Northwell Health is putting up a building for outpatient services. I don't think the solution to that is allowing highest and best use on every lot. I don't think putting up a mega wide tower mid-block will change things, because depending on the unit count, it's still going to be luxury units. I think a lot more housing needs to be with a targeted audience. The Upper East Side is one of the few neighborhoods left in much of New York City that's accessible with an aging population. The Inspire nursing living senior living center is not affordable for many people. The other senior center on between 95th and 96th and 2nd is already $6,000 a month. So I think doing more targeted affordable housing and not just saying, well, the developer's saying they're going to put some affordable housing in, so we're going to allow it to be highest and best, especially considering any environmental impacts. I mean, I've worked at DCP I don't know if I agree with everything in their environmental impact statement. Because a lot of things are glossed over there. Things can be a very high threshold before it's actually flagged as a problem versus what lay people on the ground or what statistics and numbers may say this is a problem. But DCP, I think, released a study, and the Upper East Side is the #1 district that loses the most housing in the city. There's construction everywhere at all times, and we lose the most housing, but it's always the rent stabilized housing that goes. It's the tenements that go. Developers, if it's not zoned high enough, they don't want to, they're not going to buy out the rent stabilized tenants so they can actually live somewhere else. So those buildings fall and become decrepit. I say that as someone that lives in a tenement that's falling apart. It was built in like 1900. So I think targeted affordable housing is better than just saying, well, as long as we can have the height here, that will bring the housing, because it really doesn't. I mean, I do this for work. I'm sure other people do this professionally and know about it, but just saying, I often struggle with planners, the idea of if you build, it fixes everything, when Manhattan takes the brunt of much of the building in the city. The Upper East Side, someone I know who just moved here is like, there's construction everywhere. And a lot of the construction doesn't seem to help regular people. It's not that someone was living somewhere here and, got a lottery and got to move into a better building. It's usually someone elsewhere. And market rate tenants, it's usually someone who moved here from someone else and they're like, oh, great, I live on the Upper East Side now. So it's not really helping the community on a whole. It's a function to help the city as a whole and boosting the city's economic goals and workforce and having more jobs and people here, but it doesn't directly impact and help a community grow and keep people in our communities. Because before 2019, many people who lived in tenements were just evicted or kicked out after their building was sold. They didn't have a chance of a buyout. They didn't have strong enough tenant laws that would allow you to say, no, I don't want to leave. And, there are those holdover tenants, again, with Extel's development on 86 and First. And that was a long legal battle. But before a certain amount of time, that wasn't the case. And we do have vacant buildings that were rent stabilized sitting here in lieu of a proposed development that isn't adding much housing, affordable housing, beyond what already existed on the lot. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha. I think one of the, and in a way, it's kind of your point connecting back to what Marco said, and I think it's a very important point to consider, is that we are building bigger and bigger, but the bigger and bigger largely consists of bigger and bigger apartments, which is to say that we are creating a situation where we are degrading the overall quality of life in our community. And at the same time, we are not replacing those tenements with lots of new apartments. And I'm not sure what the answer is, except to introduce maximum sizes of apartments, which I don't think anyone would let us do. Stephanie Reckler.
I want to thank Andrew for speaking so eloquently about the tall buildings and what they're doing to our community. Tall buildings aren't being built for people who can afford them. They're not affordable apartments. It appears that people are buying these large apartments and they're living in them because the lights are on. But who they are is a mystery to me. They're just large, very expensive apartments. Even the smaller apartments are beyond the means of most people looking for a place to live. I think that it's a travesty to take down the 5-story buildings that are still on the Upper East Side. I think there should be a moratorium on taking these buildings down. East 72nd Street had a push to landmark some of the buildings in the neighborhood on Lexington Avenue and from Lexington to Park Avenue. And granted, they did it as a self-serving mechanism. I don't think they did it because they felt those apartments were affordable. They did it to protect their neighborhood, but for whatever reason, it has worked. And I think the community board should look to maintaining the few 5-story buildings that exist. They're better for the environment. They have stores that have been in existence for generations. And when they're taken down and big buildings are put up, what are the stores? They're fancy nail salons, they're fancy coffee shops, those aren't affordable. They don't go with affordable housing. They go with the multi-million-dollar apartments that are being put up. And I think something should be done about it. They're not, we're destroying the environment. We're destroying the neighborhood. We're pushing apartments beyond the reach of most people. And I think we definitely need to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. And we have Wendy McIver is next.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. I want to talk a little bit socially, but really bring it back to the science after that. Socially, we cut down all this affordable housing. I'm looking out at the block between 79th and 80th. I can also see all the affordable housing that was lost on 2nd Avenue, on 81st and 80th. And, we can name all the sites in the neighborhood. But what that translates to us is, well, there's the idea that we're building a medical corridor. We don't have the staff, we don't have the nurses, the x-ray techs, the porters, and all of the people who were staffing the hospitals. They're not here. They can't afford those big, tall towers, even the ones that are not considered super luxury. But in those buildings, you're supposed to have 40 times the monthly rental income as your annual income to be considered worthy of renting there. That is not happening. So we cut down all of that. And now hospitals are actually really having a hard time staffing up. And that is going to affect all of us as well. I just want to really bring it back to the idea that you could have the loveliest 40-story building, 400-foot building in the world. And you could even have mixed use with affordable housing, but you cannot take away from the fact that it is poisoning us. And that's not okay. That's not a trade-off. And it's not a necessary trade-off either. The very height of the building, whether it's filled or empty, is going to cause tremendous pollution. And then there is an interaction between the buildings. Our earth rotates at a certain rate. We clear the air, and I put clear in quotes because that's really not a total clearance, but any chance that we have of having a dispersion of pollutants is limited when you start to block it off and create these canyons. Particulate matter is trapped at the bottom. It makes it hotter here. Then those who can afford it, add air conditioning that heats it up even more, and we create more pollution. The science of this, I used to be a great supporter of, oh yes, it's so much better than a single family house to have, a gazillion families together. I was a great supporter. Recent studies have come out. We're happy to share them. We wrote a review paper. All those scientific data-driven studies that are peer-reviewed are in there. That it actually doesn't work. That kind of density is exactly what Marco was saying. That density is a problem, but it is not just the density of people. It is also the fact that there are the buildings, the physics of building that tall, of clearing the pollution, of what we need to do to maintain those tall buildings. If no one is in them, we still have to keep the pipes at a certain temperature so they don't burst in the winter and things don't heat up too much and melt pipes and cause other hazards in the summer. We live in a variable climate. We have continuing demands and needs. And my analogy is if we all ran a daycare, a lovely, wonderful, progressively educational daycare, and we needed to fix it up for the incoming class in the fall, and we found 20 cans of paint, happened to be lead paint, perfectly usable, you could put it on the walls. Would you put that on the walls of your nursery school? No, you would not. It's poisonous. It's hazardous. It causes long-range disastrous effects for children who are in the fumes of rooms that have lead paint, even when it's not chipping. This is the same thing with the building height argument, and we do not have to go super tall. There is so much opportunity to build. There is so much opportunity to add on. There is so much opportunity to rehab. There are wonderful business opportunities. We are not anti-development. We need building and we need rehab and we need inventive ways of looking at buildings, but we also have to have a livable place where we are not going to die breathing the air. And I say it often and I mention it many, many times, but all of these ill effects in pollution affect our workers, our students, and our residents of color at a far greater rate than it affects privileged white people and people who can buy an air filter on Amazon and hope that it's going to take away all of the bad effects outside. It's really a horrible discriminatory practice that is just unconscionable. And let me also say that when you overbuild to the degree that is happening on Manhattan Island and to a great extent in parts of Brooklyn and Queens, the buildings are losing value. Those big office towers in Midtown that were supposed to deliver so much business and was supposed to be 10%, traditionally 10% of our city tax base, have now lost 44% of their value. We are the developer, the model of, I've said this in previous meetings, the model of development is not what it was in my parents' generation, where a developer would develop a building and hope to sell it, and that would be where the profit would come. The developer now makes the money in the construction, in the developing. It's icing on the cake if there's money afterwards in the sale of it. But if it goes bankrupt, well, it goes back to the bank, and the developer, meanwhile, has made a profit. I'm not going to say whether that's good, bad, or otherwise, but what I am going to say is, builders, please build. We want you. We need you. We love you. Please put retail space back on the ground floor. I'm a woman. In 2011, I had the dubious privilege of having my daughter on the 6th floor of Weill Cornell, my father on the 5th floor of Weill Cornell, and my mother on the 4th floor of Weill Cornell. And at 3:30 in the morning, I would walk home to make breakfast and lunch for my son and my husband, and it was safe. It is not safe now. The minute that the block up between 79th and 80th was knocked down, I'll wrap up. I'll wrap up. The minute that was knocked down, there was a mugging on that block. There have been many others since. So for all of the reasons, but especially for the actual physics and science of this, we can't build to the sky. It is unconscionable and we won't survive it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy. Now it looks like we are at committee members. Alita, thank you for being so patient.
Oh, my pleasure. It is a pleasure to listen to everyone. Thank you, Anthony. There are a lot of fallacies at work here. We have a study that Andrew quoted, that other people have quoted, that we have lost 14,000 affordable units. No one is paying attention to that. Everyone sees the Upper East Side as a sea of wealthy people buying condos, buying co-ops, seeking to preserve their value, only living on Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, and that's the entire district, East End Avenue, and that's simply not true, as we all know. We have lost more units than anyone else in the city, but no one is looking at that. Interestingly, CB7 and Landmarks West are working with the Department of City Planning to bring back the ABC site into the Lincoln Square Special District. That site was Larry Silverstein owns, I believe, and he was seeking to build a tower of, I think, 70 to 100 stories. I don't remember. Now City Planning is working with CB7. We can't get them to pay any attention at all to us, despite having lost affordable housing, despite having lost small businesses, despite the prices of these units being so high that I don't even understand how any kind of New York or even a Wall Street executive can or broker can live in these buildings. They're just simply too expensive. If you look at Icon and what it built on 2nd Avenue and 80th and 81st Street, one first floor is Pecora Bianca, a huge semi-reasonably priced Italian restaurant, but it takes up the entire space. And the other, as we all heard, is a preschool, and I'll get to that in old business. But $68 million was the price for a 4-story penthouse unit in the Naftali building on 86th Street and Madison Avenue. We know the lengths that 1045 Madison went to get rid of the bus stop because, well, gee, there's a lot of entitlement, but that is not the rest of the Upper East Side. We need to make city planning listen to the affordable housing numbers. We need to make them see what these buildings look like. We need to get people to understand that putting up these high-priced buildings leads to a value of real estate that's so high that it makes it impossible to get anything other than what is being built here. The fallacy is the cities as well, that by giving up its responsibility to build affordable housing to for-profit developers, that affordable housing is going to be built, because we know it's not. Other cities mandate the types of things that should be built. We don't. Everything is as of right, and the as of right is that we get these towers and no affordable units. I think we need to, I don't know if it involves spending more money to get a real study that the city will pay attention to on how much small business and how much affordable housing has been lost, but we need to make affordable housing the pollution, which I'm not a scientist, I don't have, but if Andrew or Wendy has, I would use that to make pollution and what these buildings do to the environment, because how could they possibly be consistent with the city's drive to make New York carbon neutral when concrete alone is responsible for 7 or 8% of emissions, and buildings taller than 210 feet contribute, buildings in general contribute 70 to 90% of emissions. So I don't even understand how they could be consistent. I'll stop, but we need to do something to get the city to pay attention to what's going on up here, other than thinking that it's either what we deserve by getting all of these high-priced buildings. And in addition, my concern is that looking at these high-priced buildings, the city's going to say, well, look, it's more wealthy people moving in. Now we have to mandate even higher limits to get affordable housing. And so they're hoisting themselves up by their own petard, and we're getting penalized by the developers building exactly what they're entitled to build, which does nothing for our community. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think we need to do something in neon lights to get the city to pay attention to what's going on, because it certainly is not what they believe is going on. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alita. Peggy Price.
Thanks to the committee's co-chairs for providing us all with the documentation on the pressing need for limits on the heights of new buildings. You know, the committee, though, created the Yorkville and Lenox Hill special zoning district that would create a 210 height limit on parks of the Upper East Side. So my question is, how do we go forward with that important plan? I'm aware that the city has turned thumbs down to it, but we can't just give up on it. It's essential for all the reasons that have been cited here tonight. And how do we reactivate this proposal? I think we should talk about that tonight, what we're going to do to get height limits on the Upper East Side. The public has been very eloquent tonight on the need for caps on building heights. So what can we do to promote, for example, the special zoning district, the Yorkville and Lenox Hill Special Zoning District? Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yes,
Anthony?
yes. I think part of the problem is that as the politics of the city are such, the politics of the city right now are such that there is it's not just now. Who am I trying to fool? For the last 50 years, the emphasis in this city has been on essentially unrestrained real estate development. And until there are two things have to happen. One is that some entity, which is to say probably the federal government, has to once again become involved in creating housing, not just in New York City, but nationwide. And on the other end, the other piece of that is having a political class that is no longer beholden to the real estate interests. And that maybe is a sort of gloomy thing to say, but I believe that we can be as logical as we like, and we can have the support informally of people who work in city planning. But I think that it is very hard to get the attention of city planning for restrictions on development.
Well, that means we shouldn't do anything?
No. Obviously, we have to press on. I think we still have to try and figure out how best to do that, and how to do that in a way where we might, in fact, be successful. And I think
Well, can we have a special meeting about that or something so that we don't just drop this? I mean, the buildings are going up left, right, and center, creating an enormous problem. And we need to do something now. That's my view. And we should talk about this, and maybe in a different forum or something, but we need to get some kind of action plan. We do have the Yorkville and Lenox Hill special district. And if the committee didn't perceive that that was viable, it never would have created it. Maybe we can modify it, maybe something, but why don't we do something? Why don't we take the reins here, either tonight or create another meeting that's an action plan around it or a modified version of it, but take the reins and do something.
I hear you. I think we all do. I don't know that there is full anonymity on the topic of just specifically 210. I think everyone believes that we should have better control over development in our community district than we do, which is effectively none. And I almost think that we need a kind of we need more than a single approach. It's not just the special districts. It's also speaking to sort of larger zoning issues within the city. And the hard part right now is getting anyone to pay attention. And I think Alita said that, and it's absolutely the truth. No one wants to pay attention. because we seem as though we are just resisting out of hand all resisting out of hand all development, which, to be honest, probably some of us do. But I think you're right. We have to develop a proper strategy, and I know that there are conversations going on right now, and hopefully they will yield something, and we'll be able to talk about it more fully next month. And you're right, Craig.
Thank you, Anthony. So just listening to everything, I think it's clear we're all in agreement as to the problem being new construction replacing low-rise buildings that results in luxury units that are anything but affordable, while we're losing 14,000 net affordable units, or 14,000 housing units, many of which are affordable. But the question I'm hearing is, how do we stop this from happening? And that's an entirely separate discussion, in my opinion, from 210-foot height limits, because these 210-foot height limits, I don't believe, will stop hungry developers from finding ways to tear down existing buildings and maxing out their permissible FAR to build luxury units. And that, I think, is the crux as to why our 210 plan did not work. But as long as we're discussing 210-foot height limits in an environmental context, and as long as we're sharing cherry-picked articles that we post on the agenda claiming New York City is sinking, and using it to argue that in favor of 210-foot height limits, or buildings made of wood, or even just suggestions that 400-foot tall buildings are going to kill us with their emissions, I just want to call to attention everyone's article that really resonated with me. And this was published in the New York Times this past December. Will, I think I had sent it to you. If you could just post the two things that I was hoping we could share. So this is, in this article, it was basically just a focus on emissions by neighborhood. So they essentially mapped the entire climate footprint of the country based on neighborhood and even block level places. And I wanted to call to attention two different things here. One here, this element in which it says that even in hyperdense Manhattan, rich households on the Upper East Side have a bigger climate impact than their neighbors just a few blocks away, because they fly more, have bigger apartments, and buy more stuff. And Will, if you could just scroll down a little, you'll be able to, or there, you could see, go back up. Yes, perfect. You can see that everything is a sea of green, essentially, except for our community district west of 3rd Avenue, where coincidentally, we have the 210-foot height limits in place. So I just want to call that to everyone's attention. And if you were to, and we don't have to do this here, but if we were to zoom out and look at the rest of the city, this is the only area in Manhattan, aside from the World Trade Center, that has that yellow or brown shading, suggesting that we are not nearly as good in terms of emissions per household as elsewhere in New York City. And if you zoomed out further, you'd see that suburbs are also a very different situation as well. So I guess what I want to say in terms of that is that I think we sometimes lose the skyline through the towers, to be fair. So density and height is what enables our community district and much of Manhattan to be what it is, and to achieve all sorts of other efficiencies that are gained as a result of it. So I think that's part of the issue, that we focus on the buildings, the potential downsides of tall buildings, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. So I'm not discounting the facts, and that high-rise buildings may not always be the most energy efficient or carbon neutral compared to shorter buildings. But let's put it into perspective. Maybe a 4-story building is most efficient if it's especially a wood frame, which is not happening in Manhattan. Maybe in our district especially, and maybe it's a somewhat higher building, but we can't look at that in a vacuum without considering all the other elements comprising development needs. like ensuring we have enough housing and affordable housing to sustain our city and community districts, something that wouldn't be achievable if we downzoned or had a built environment similar to what these articles are saying are optimal. And aren't we at odds with ourselves if we are continuing to press for a 210-foot height limit, but we're concurrently opposed to lifting FAR caps that would help us achieve our affordable housing goals potentially? So let's have that discussion and let's see how we could leverage such a FAR policy change with our affordable housing goals and see if we could find ways and creative ways to solve this issue that we all agree upon. We spent the better part of the past 5 years pursuing this 210-foot height limit, and we've gotten nowhere, literally nowhere, except for spending tens of thousands of dollars to develop an application that landed with a big thud at city planning. So it's plain to see why it was rejected. Arbitrary height limits just aren't a sound urban planning practice in a dense urban environment such as Community District 8, and such height limits won't stop developers from swallowing up underbuilt sites that tend to contain the affordable housing stock that we can't afford to lose. So let's have a conversation dealing with the problem, but let's please stop coming back to 210 feet as a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I have to say that I'm trying to be nice here. I disagree with you utterly, totally, and completely. The problem with housing in this district in New York City is not that the buildings aren't tall enough, not that we don't have a large enough FAR available to developers. And in fact, the 210 height limit would in fact have the same FAR as the current zoning. But going beyond that, not discussing that at all, the problem is that Mickey Naftali, no reason why he shouldn't, no reason why he shouldn't be named, somebody else did already, Mickey Naftali doesn't want to build affordable units and nobody's making him build affordable units. So he is building 4,000 square foot apartments for rich people. And the fact of the matter is that until the city, the state, the federal government demands affordable housing and assumes that housing is a right, not a privilege. A place to live is a right, not a privilege. Until we do that as a nation, let alone as a city, we will continue to have building after building built for the very few because that's where the money is.
I don't disagree with that.
I know you do.
No, I don't. Yeah. I don't disagree with what you said. I just think that we're talking about.
No, but that's not it. But that's not the way isn't to just build more stuff. The way is to build the right stuff, and we're not doing it. And there is no incentive built into our political system or social system to ask, force, mandate that developers do that. That's what it is. I mean, most of our public housing and affordable housing stock, and I'm not talking about the tenements now, was built in the period between 1932 and 1970. And it ended and it hasn't come back and it won't come back until we, much larger we than the people on this call, force it.
I would absolutely agree with that.
And I am tired of hearing that 210 is a loser. Of course it's a loser. Anything that prevents unrestrained development is a loser. Rita.
Anthony, I agree with you 100%. I have been involved in affordable housing for many years. And in fact, I live in the same building as Boaz. And he really doesn't know the story of what this building was to what it is. It is now a market rate building, and it has marble and wood floors and dishwashers and frost-free refrigerators. That was not the case when this building was built. Let's go back to Mitchell Lama, where it was in every Mitchell Lama developer became wealthy. So it's not a question of that. The question is that we are not asking for creative financing for affordable housing. We don't ask, we don't get it. If anybody, let's go down to Washington. Let's do it. Mitchell Lama was state and federal. Right now, I am so tired of hearing that the developer doesn't want it. And 210 is, if that's, I mean, Paris lives on a height limit, and they manage to live. We can do it on 210. And the other fallacy is that not every single walk-up apartment that has been destroyed has been an affordable housing apartment. It has not been, but we built 100,000 affordable apartments. What did those apartments do? They completely made communities. Down in Tribeca, nobody wanted to live in Tribeca. Nobody went down there. They built a absolutely beautiful building. It was going to be market rate. Nobody went there. So they made it a Mitchell Lama, and people moved there. And you know what? Look at what Tribeca is now. Not only that, we're so afraid that affordable means brown, that people of color will take over. That was not the case before that. And to Boaz, the people who are still living in the building who came in 48 years ago get their incomes checked every single year. They pay 30% of their adjustable income. I know, I help them do their papers. We can do it. We have to want to do it. We have people on our board who don't want to do it because they like birds. We have just representative of a cross section of the city. We can do it. I keep saying that. They're doing it in Brooklyn. Why are they doing it in Brooklyn? Because they want to keep, we're so happy that you keep the brown people in Brooklyn, in East New York. We're happy. We are prejudiced, and that's part of it. And when I hear the developer doesn't like it, I have spoken to the developer, and I can have my developer come here. What they hated about Mitchell Lama was one thing: the paperwork. The paperwork that every tenant has to fill out every single year, and it has to go through their office. That alone changed everything. Look at the communities. There was nothing above 86th Street until they built where we had our art show. And people look up and say, oh, it's such a great place to live. It is a great place to live. They didn't want to live here when there was no dishwasher. There was no defrost-free refrigerator. There were no wooden floors. So let's get real. Let's get on. More than that, let's get honest. We have a problem with the climate. We have a problem with affordable housing. I haven't heard one thing about that Upper Yorkville proposal, which I think was brilliant, of Adam Wald. Haven't heard one thing. I hear MIH. It'll only be partially affordable. What do you mean partially affordable? We're tired of getting the partial. And the one thing that the pandemic taught us is that essential workers are not only doctors and nurses. They are also the people who wash the floor in the hospital. They are the people who wash the beds and the linens. And we have to take care of them. On the next pandemic, where should we send them? Should we send them, let them travel for an hour and whatever? That is ridiculous. Let's find out, what does a school teacher make coming right out of college? Everybody who lives in Boaz in my apartment who rented, there are now 6 people living in a 3-bedroom apartment. One will move, everybody moves. Moving doesn't require a moving van anymore. It's a Pilates mat, a quilt, a pillow, and your clothes. That's it, because everybody is transit. I'm sorry, this is my soapbox. I have been on it for a long time. I am going to meet with a developer and ask him what it will take to bring him back to Mitchell-Lama. He was in it first. Does anybody want to go with me? Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you, Anthony. I think the challenge of 210 is that it was easily perceived as a request for a limitation that would keep development out, that would benefit the people who already live in this area, and that mimicked a restriction that exists in areas of extreme wealth. And I think that is a perception of 210 and contributes to, although is not the sole reason why this mayor's administration was not interested in it. So for me, the question is, what are things that we could propose that would create alignment with the city's needs? And that would, in that process, address what I think we are all concerned about, which is a loss of units. So what about proposing changes to, and I don't know if this is zoning regulations or other city law, somebody more knowledgeable than I would have to sort of define what this would be. But what about regulations that require, in cases of building demolition, an increase in the number of units in the replacement building, which could be scaled appropriately based on the size or the number of units in the building that was demolished? So that is one thing that it would be very difficult to argue is not in the city's broader interests in development. What about going in the path of a height limit, a proposal that explicitly provides bonuses in height and potentially an FAR for buildings that increase the units being produced by a certain by a higher percentage, or that increase the percentage of affordable units in the building by a higher percentage. Those are things that at least would present more broadly as serving a broader city interest in increasing the number of housing units. And I think anything that our community puts forward, fairly or not, needs to really sort of go overboard in how does it meet the city's broader interests and not appear to protect the privileges of our wealthier communities.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think you're right about needing sort of creative solutions. One that was suggested to me, which I think is a good one, although I have no idea how you would do it, would be to require developers who are demolishing affordable units to, in fact, relocate the displaced within the community district. I think one of the problems that we've seen over the years is that people's houses are demolished out from under them, and they are, in fact, then they move away. They don't move to another apartment in the same district. And I think that we lose some of our variety is the wrong word, but we lose a lot of our neighborhood character as people are, in fact, longtime residents are, in fact, forced out. I'm going to skip you, Sasha, and come back to you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Let me just say, remind the community board that we have a resolution that was almost unanimous supporting a 210 height limit on the avenues. And we have proposed a special district to enforce that. The support for that, even though the resolution is there, and there is support for it generally on the community board, there may be tweaking, but there is general support, has been sort of pushed aside because we lost the funding. We thought we had the funding, but it got entwined between different committees on this board. And so it ended up not being available to us the way we would have liked, so that we could go forward with what we wanted to do. Because we have that unanimous resolution, it is perfectly fine for anybody on this board to go forward on his or her own, or join or support or form any group to support this effort. And those kind of efforts are going on. So each of you who wants to support this, I suggest that you reach out to others in the community and that you join such an effort. To those of you who were talking about that the government should come in and build this and build that, whether it be the federal, the state, or whoever, that's perfectly fine if it's on their land. But we don't take private property here. So that's not what we do in this country. And nor do I think we should start to do that. But if the government has land, we should encourage them to build on it. We can't equate, as was earlier assumed, that there was a causal effect, that because the Upper East Side is the densest in the country, that it's because we have a 210 height district. Two things can be true without there being a causal relationship between them. And I think that's true in this case. So we have the mandate to go forward. I and others are doing everything that we can to go forward with this, but you have to be, you're right when you say, let me say this, we are trying to give the city what it wants in terms of its needs for affordable housing. City planning, unfortunately, at the moment, believes that the only path to that is unrestricted height development. I don't think that's true. I don't think any of us think that's true. And I think there are many other ways to go. And many of us are pursuing those efforts. But when it comes to talking about it here at the community board, and on the zoning committee, which you would think would be the most appropriate place to talk about it, it really isn't, because we don't have the ability. What we have is the mandate to go forward. We don't have because we have the resolution. We don't have the mandate as to how to go forward. And so we are going to have to create that on our own. And whether we do that by joining other organizations or instituting things on our own, that may be. But I think we're beating a dead horse here, and we're also conflating a lot of different issues. So one issue is the 210 height district. I think we can sell it to the city if we tie it to affordable housing and show how affordable housing can be built, even if there's a 210 height limit, and how in fact the 210 height limit is actually causing us to lose affordable housing. Every person on this call does not need the community board or another resolution to make that effort and reach out to your elected officials, to other community groups, to whoever you think would be like-minded, and pursue it in that way. I've given up on the funding coming in to do it as we had originally planned by filing with city planning. The philosophy down there is no height limits, and that's why we were sort of cut off. But that's because our presentation lacked the very important component, Elizabeth Rose alluded to it, of showing them that it's in their interest and that in fact it does satisfy their needs. I and others think we have a way that we can do that, and I think each of you should pursue that as best you can. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Barbara Rudder.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. I just would like to say, and I don't mean to be petty about it, but you talk about many things, including environment, and I think that sometimes you should wonder about what joint committees you should be having. As an environment co-chair, I have reached out to the zoning committee many, many times. What has been discussed has been many things, environment just one of it. I want to start off by saying hooray, hooray, hooray to Rita. I agree so much, and please call on me. I will go with you, and I'm going to address that in a little bit. One of the major things we've talked about is affordable housing, which is not the environment, but I care about very much. I brought this up many times. I brought it up recently at a meeting with the borough president, and I get no answer, and I would like an answer to say you're wrong for pursuing this. One of the problems with affordable housing is we have these developers come. It takes them a long time to clear out the building, which means there's no affordable housing in these apartments for a long time. It takes them a long time to actually demolish the buildings and a long time to build it. So that we could talk about the extreme on 86th Street, which is about 15 years, but others that are years in the making, when we have not only lost affordable housing that won't be replaced one by one, but they've lost it for years and years along the way. I don't know why we can't pursue saying that before buildings are demolished and emptied, there has to be some sort of plan. It can't be that there's a legal glitch that we wanted to, that two buildings, did not want to sell to us, and therefore we can't do anything about it. We have this going on across the street from me, across the street from me, and so on. That was one thing. The other thing, just to get back to something that Rita said, I've been thinking about this a whole lot, and as an environment committee, I talked to Russell. I want to have this I was thinking of housing, but certainly with zoning also. I know a woman that has very successfully built a couple of large buildings just a little bit north of us on 99th Street. There are buildings, I went to a meeting there, they are beautiful. I think one of them at least is just a senior housing. And she is, I'm not saying she's going to be Excel with it. I'm not saying, but certainly she is doing okay with it. And it is a beautiful building that is truly affordable. In fact, some of her people, those that came from the Goldwater Hospital in Roosevelt Island. Rita, I would be glad to talk with you, and we could invite somebody else along, and please include me with your search. And I applaud you for what you said.
Thank you, Barbara. We now have Juno. Juno, welcome.
Okay, I want to say first that I agree with Barbara. Like, there's definitely a need for a plan for developers, but I don't see how having a height limit is going to be like a direct way of addressing your problems, because you're kind of just assuming that, oh, you put in a height limit and everything else will fall into place. But like, there's no way of ensuring that will happen. And in terms of the environment, it's important to think as well that if there isn't so much, like, of course we have to cut down on luxury housing, but if there's like no luxury housing at all, these people are just going to go to the suburbs and they're going to have like enormous houses there, and that just worsens the environmental problem. Maybe it makes like our district have less like carbon emissions, but for the whole state, it's not going to help anything. Yeah,
Thank you. I think it's the sort of second point you made seems to me to be a little bit like well, if we discourage people in any way, no one will build anything or want to move to New York. And I don't think that that's actually true. I think that developers build in our neighborhood not because it's easy, but because that's where the money is. And I think that developers will not be discouraged by additional regulations or requirements. And as to the first point, just to sort of, and then I'll call on Valerie. And the proposal for the special districts has, I think, achieved an unfortunate goal in that it is described as 210. It's not. The height limit is only one aspect of a large number of elements that are intended, in fact, to preserve existing housing. And so for us to call it 210, call it height limits, that's not what the districts are for. The districts will exist once they do exist. They will exist to preserve our existing tenement housing and to encourage and preserve some of the smaller scale retail that is also lost through large developments. And so I think that it's important that all of us in this room on this call, this large virtual room, think of these proposals not as height limits, but as attempts, vain as they might be at this, or seem to be at this point, attempts to preserve and encourage the preservation of existing housing, and also the preservation and encouragement of small-scale retail, because that's something that's lost just as much through this process as as the our relatively affordable housing in the tenement buildings. Valerie.
Thanks. I don't know how to start this because, you know, there are height limits in almost every area of the city except for our little piece of the scape. And I think I had mentioned once before, Anthony, looking at it a different way, sort of like an NFL salary cap, and that every neighborhood should have an FAR cap. And you can choose based on where you live and based on the needs of your community. Maybe we have like one super tall somewhere and it's balanced out by small housing, and you could have points or how it, I mean, it actually takes planning. And I think the one thing that we're all hitting on here is that city planning isn't really doing a lot of planning. It's basically a who's in charge for 4 years and then they take over. And then we are sort of the collateral damage in all of that. And, you know, I really would love, since we have a new city planning commissioner, he has never come to this community board to talk about a vision or answer to us about any of our concerns. I mean, we have been begging to get some answers from not the city liaison, but I think, you know, Dan Garodnick, being a former councilman of a member of this district, I think owes us a personal appearance to talk about what the vision is for city planning and to answer to us. I mean, he should know about Adam's proposal already. He should know about our proposal that has been resoundingly rejected by city planning. He should know about all these things, and he should be prepared to come to one of our meetings and talk to us and hear from Rita and hear from everyone else about what is our vision for this community. And he should be offering up some solutions, because to be quite honest about it, the underlying current of this administration and every administration before that is, if they're really honest about it, they don't want affordable housing on the Upper East Side. This is, to your point, where all the money on real estate is to be made. I mean, if we could not win the Longfellow Tower fight, we can't win an affordable housing fight. And I think, you know, that's just showing where this is. And until we can get somebody to come in and talk about just what is the plan for the island of Manhattan. I mean, you've got an 80-foot cap on the Lower East Side. Why is that there? I mean, that's there to promote policies that probably don't really have that much justification anymore. So, and I agree with you. Height limit is not really what we are asking for. We're basically talking about, maybe, I think, from listening to everybody, trade-offs for different things. And we can't get anybody to give us what the vision is, not only for our community, but for the entire even island of Manhattan. There is no planning going on. This is a hodgepodge of things thrown together, and there's never a long-term vision, as evidenced by the fact that the zoning code really hasn't been changed since the 60s, that there are buildings being built without parking in them, even though people are clamoring for a more open street. You can't have a more open street if you don't have a place to park a car. And since 40 years ago, they gave up that part of the zoning code, we are literally 40 years behind in the number of parking spaces that we should have in our city, regardless of whether you're in favor of cars in Manhattan or not. And this is really the problem. And I don't really, you know, we keep going around trying to solve this problem on our own, but we can't do it. We can't do it without a vision for what is happening here. And I really think that this, like the mayor's plan, say yes, and all this stuff, there is no vision here for affordable housing in Manhattan, on the Far East Side and wherever else. And I also think it's terrible it's terrible that city officials view the Upper East Side as a monolith and can't see that we are made up of diverse economic neighbors already. We have, they don't even view really the Far East Side as being residential. They see Bedpan Alley and they don't even notice that we have affordable housing stock. I mean, right now on 72nd Street and 2nd Avenue, we are stuck with a stagnant construction site on our corner that is blighting the entire 2nd Avenue and 72nd Street corner. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I think the developer has run out of money. And now we lost we lost 8 buildings of affordable housing, people who fought to stay in those apartments till the bitter end. And I was getting calls from people who were in rent controlled and rent stabilized apartments there who didn't want to leave, who were offered 7 figures to move out of their apartment. They finally emptied them, tore them down, and now we're sitting there with a rat infested construction site and no building on the horizon. And, that's an as of right building. So, I mean, I really think that, we need to have somebody come in, tell us where we want to go, give us some planning, but we can't be just planning for the Upper East Side. I mean, I'm all in favor of moving forward with Adam's proposal, because I think the quicker we get it to city planning and they reject it, because they will reject anything that we offer, then we can Adam says no, but I'm sure they'll come up with some reason why it's no good. And then we can figure out whether we're really dealing with people who really do have a vision for this city, or people who are just, status quo approving what the real estate developers want to do. I mean, it is unbelievable that I'm looking at there were like 6 buildings on my corner that had somewhat affordable housing. And I was hearing from people calling me crying, how can we stay in our building? And now they've been out of it for 2 years and there's nothing going up there. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm gonna call on Adam next, who has not spoken. Although he did wag his finger at us once, and appropriately, I think. I think the Upper Yorkville rezoning might in fact be a winner. So go ahead, Adam.
This conversation has morphed from height limits to affordable housing. And I would like to point out that the loss of the 421A tax abatement program has proven to be and will continue to prove to be incredibly detrimental to housing production in the city of New York. Mark Levine spoke about this in his announcement, that in the month of May, there were 0 building permits filed in the borough of Manhattan to develop new housing. And there were 6 permits filed throughout New York City. Now, that could be a function of the interest rate environment and developers taking a pause. But REBNY has put out every month a foundation permit tracking. And once 421A elapsed, there is a huge gap in the number of housing permits filed. And Dan Garodnick and Jessica Katz, before she left, the city has been spending an incredible amount of time in Albany imploring them to extend the back end of 421 and to initiate a new 421 replacement program. The legislators in the assembly have connected this. They essentially held it ransom in connection with good cause eviction, which is a debate for another time. But they have essentially put in jeopardy all production of housing, not just affordable housing, not just rental housing, housing in New York because of 420, because there's no extension of 421A on the back end, and there's no replacement program for 421A. So all the complaints about affordable housing, in my opinion, they're falling on the deaf ears of the people in the legislature, and you don't need to be yelling at each other on a Zoom. You need to be targeting all of your anger at the people who sit in Albany and who refuse to do what's necessary to incentivize the development of rental housing and affordable housing in the city of New York. And you'll notice that some of the tall buildings going up, especially on 2nd Avenue, 250 East 83rd, that is an affordable or quasi-affordable rental apartment building. Across the street, 300 East 83rd Street, that is also a rental building with an affordable component. Developers, like you say, the Upper East Side is not a monolith. Developers are not a monolith. There are developers who are building affordable housing, who are building mixed income rentals. They are doing this because the 421A program and because of HPD's certain programs that they have, it allows them to build rental housing. So Mickey Naftali is not every developer, Mr. Cohen. And there are your Torquians and your Lalazarians, and there are folks who are building rental housing in this neighborhood. And they're doing so because they had 421A. Without 421A, it is impossible to do so. So.
Okay, I stand corrected.
And no height limits. Height limits are bad now.
All right, thank you, Adam. I'm sorry, Marco, just let's do Sherry and then Marco, and then I think it's 9:15. Go ahead.
I want to just say Adam hit the nail on the head. As you know, I was a municipal attorney in New Jersey. In New Jersey, the legislature passed a law that says any building that is housing building is done has to have 20% affordable. You have to have your housing, the municipalities have to have your housing plan approved. It used to be the Council on Affordable Housing, and now it's another local group. But people have, and what the developers get out of this is that an increased density. I mean, developers are not going to put in most developers are not going to put in affordable housing unless they get something out of it. So in New Jersey, you have to build affordable housing. In Livingston, you know, where I was the attorney, all the new development, yeah, it's 80%. So we get 80% market rate, which is more than they would have gotten, but we do get 20% affordable. And unless people are required to do it, they're not going to do it. And who made the comment about, Marco and I, we've talked about this, they're required, in the city, they're required if they move people, they have to replace them right in the district, in the same, when nobody enforces it. Nobody requires these developers to do that. So, I mean, yeah, there are some people who are good-natured and will do affordable housing just because it's the right thing to do. But we know most people are motivated by money, and unless they're required to put in the affordable housing, they won't do it. And one just thing on the 210 height limit, forgetting about the affordable house, I resent that I cannot find any sun in my neighborhood. When I walk down the avenues, the only time I see sun is on, you know, the streets. So, and in other cities, they do really ask about the shade factor that comes to the building. I think we give lip service to it in New York, but I think we have a right to have sunshine on our sidewalks. And I think that's, so I forget, as I said, forgetting about the affordable housing, we should, 210 is a reasonable height. You see on Park Avenue, I mean, those are nice height buildings, and yet the sun comes through. So that's why I'm a proponent for 210 housing, is because I want to see some sunshine in the Upper East Side. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. And I think we now have Marco.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to attack you, by the way. Okay, this is a democracy, okay? And always I'm against David Helper. David Helper, he's strictly said, okay, you don't talk the meaning of the agenda, you cannot continue. And he's right. You know, usually I has been fighting with him. I said, no, 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 this is democracy. But democracy, we have to align the ideas of the agenda. Otherwise, it will come 1,000 ideas and we reach empty outcome. That is one comment I would like to do it, but nothing against you. Be careful. The second point that I would like to raise is Elizabeth Rose. She established in a very nice words the theoretical frame of how to approach this problem of affordable housing. She's general. I don't know if she understands deeply what she's mentioned, but she established a very good points. And I think that is the main idea. I think that is one of the good conclusions that we have. The second part is, look, Major Adams said, we want to build 500,000 affordable units. Look, isn't real. He needs trillions of dollars. So we need zoning. We need a different policy, different alternatives in order to reach that part, in order to work with him. And that's, I think, is the key, all of that, to work with him, to help him to achieve something that I found that they never can achieve because of the amount of money, because of the demolition of housing, because the developers do not have no control. Look, in the Upper East Side, they're never gonna see it. If I see it, it will be rarely to use the 421A, because this is more for other neighborhoods. The developers in our neighborhood, they are so rich. They don't need money. The money is loaded, so they can put it whatever they want. And sometimes they use the incentive that is convenient for them. And I'm trying to focus my discussion is in something that I'm doing right now. And I know that as there's this real investigation that I did in the community. And that is basically the developer are not interested in to have any financial incentives. They want to have something good to make profit. I agree with them, but we had to limit the profits, and we cannot establish something that they're gonna get upset. But we had to take an example, the one of the developers doing in our community, and we had to follow them, because it's no Marco's idea or Anthony's idea or Elizabeth's idea. No, we had to see what the developers they are building right here. We follow them. And with that argument, we can argue the city planning. We can argue everywhere, because right now they accuse us that, oh, we don't develop housing. Well, look, if there are no working permits, it's very simple. That is called inflation. Inflation myself, I'm afraid to do anything. Why? Because I don't know the cost. How much it's gonna cost me? And I'm the savvy and knowledgeable developer are extremely cautious, and they said, no, let me see what is this gonna reach the level of inflation, because housing is not only, oh, let me build 1,000 affordable units or 500, whatever it is. No, housing, there are many factors that impact in the production of housing. It's not only one, it has several factors. So finally, let me finish saying that, yes, city planning do not participate actively in the production of housing. They let the free market be guided. I agree with that. Well, let's go establish some rules and policy that help us to produce affordable housing. Not only affordable housing, different types of housing, because if you stop the middle income housing, those middle income housing, it will put pressure in those affordable housing, and the landlord will start harass those residents because they have other middle income people that are willing to pay even more for that apartment. So housing is not a simple matter. Housing is very complex issue, and we had to discuss what is in the reality of the neighborhood. Yes, sometimes they come in with beautiful ideas from all over the city. No, we need our solutions because we are unique. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Just to Sasha and Andrew, normally we try not to have people, especially members of the public, speaking more than once on a topic, and as it is already 9:18, I am inclined to enforce that. So we have an old business, new business. Silence. Michelle.
I'd like to move to adjourn if we have no old or new business.
Excellent. Marco has seconded. Is anyone, I don't see any strong objections. So thank you very much. We will
Thank you
see
very
you,
much.
I hope.